Well, thank you so much for coming. I can't even tell you how grateful I am for you being willing to spend your time learning or relearning what you knew about the Headquarters Plaza project. I've spent the better part of the last 5 years trying to piece together this story. As I said to my friend Colleen, I was like, this has been my baby for so long. I'm so nervous about sharing it because it is so dear to my heart. So the nerves will dissipate. I did teach for 20 years, so I should have this under my belt, but I'm just going to give that disclaimer. Most of what I've found, or a lot of what I found, I posted on Instagram on the Morristown project. So you can find more stuff there, as well as emailing me if you have any questions. I'll put this slide up at the end so you can see it then if you have any further questions. A word about the title. 44 Acres of Concrete is a quote from Ray DeShera, who was the executive director of the Urban Renewal Project. And he was trying to convey to someone how massive this project was. And I just thought, when I read it, I was like, that is such a collection of words. 44 acres of concrete, which is really what they were doing at the time. But I do want to mention that the making of Headquarters Plaza is a bit, it's important for me to have a huge disclaimer in that the Headquarters Plaza is the name we use for it. Most of the shenanigans of its construction happened before it's called the Headquarters Plaza, right? And Olnick and Fisher, who built Headquarters Plaza, generally removed from the shenanigans. So this is not an accusation against anything they did, but if I put like the making of Speedwell Avenue Arc 159, so I just wanted people to know what we were talking about. And this is part one of a two-parter. This is design and demolition, and then in April we'll talk about construction and completion. Most of the shenanigans I just mentioned are in part two, so you're going to have to come back. Why do I feel like I can give a talk on the Headquarters Plaza? As James mentioned, I've spent a lot of time here, about every week for 3 years. I'd send James these emails like, hey, can I read this file? He would come back with, sure. How about 10 o'clock tomorrow morning? So I spent hours upon hours here. Ray DeShera's family very generously donated his papers. They are a tremendous resource here at the library. Emilio Gervasio donated his papers. In his description of his papers, he said it was a response to an assignment his grandson's teacher had given him at Alexander Hamilton, that they wanted to know something about family history, and the result was boxes and boxes of Emilio Gervasio's papers, which were wonderful. Read a ton of newspapers, articles. I went to the library at Drew. I went to the Library of Congress. I went to New York Public Library. There's access, archives at the University of Minnesota, tons of books, and tons of personal interviews. And one of the most amazing part of the interviews was that every single person said, you really have to talk to this person. And so every conversation led to another conversation, which is wonderful. Now, I have one question. Are you having trouble hearing me in the back? No? Okay. If you at any point need me to speak louder, just raise your hand. I do have my teacher voice I can use. Okay, so just so you know, one of the reasons why I'm so grateful for you being here is because when I talk to people outside of Morristown, and they're like, what are you up to? I'm like, I'm researching the history of a parking garage. They're like, what? And every single piece that I brought into the puzzle, right, I was like, this disconnected, and this is connected, and this guy, this meme just kept coming up. Because I was like, there's so much to this story, and I'm so glad you understand how significant it is. Like I said, there's two parts. This first part is really an intention of answering the question, like, why is this project here? It was an urban renewal project. What made the people in the leadership in the town of Morristown believe they could take that on? Who was the champion of it, and who was completely opposed to it? Part two, we're going to end in 1971 today. Part two is when this is going to hit a chord if you remember this. We'll talk about Stanley Guglielmo stealing the dirt. All right, somebody remembers that. There's the grand jury investigations, the organized criminal activity, the methamphetamines. Anyway, so that's in part 2. And part of what inspired me what started this whole thing was McCabe, who was my neighbor up the street, and I grew up on Farragut. She said there's absolutely organized crime involved in the construction, and I wanted to see what truth there was behind that. And some of you may remember Anne used to write letters to the editor of the Daily Record citing them Cassandra after the Trojan priestess who was blessed with perfect foresight and cursed with a life which no one believed her. So make of that what you will. Just a spoiler. Okay, here we go. This is a map from 1885. I promise you I will not go year by year from 1885 to 1971. But I wanted to start with this map for 2 reasons. First off, this is green, right? And this is Park Place, and this is Water Street, right? And I didn't realize when I started this that Water Street used to connect pretty directly from Park Place, right? It didn't do that weird curve underneath what's now Topgolf. And there's also on here, you can see this pond, right? The pond is a key part of the story because it was, back in the day, fairly powerful current going through here. There's a grist mill at the base of that. It becomes a place where bootleggers dropped their mash from their distilleries that were on Speedwell Avenue. Word was you could get drunk just by standing by the mill pond, even on a sunny day. And this drains from Burnham Pond, right? You know that odd little creek behind the bleachers at the high school, right? It goes under Speedwell, drains into the Whippany River. So when the hollow floods, as it does often, it's not just Pocahontas Lake and the Whippany River, it's also the water coming through here. This still goes underneath the towers. So that's important. You can see it on this map from the opposite direction, right? Coming through here. That's part of the reason why this project was even begun, because a lot of it wasn't very well maintained, right? It's kind of a mess back there. So that's part of the inspiration behind it. The other thing I wanted to point out in this map was this area here was totally different than it is now. There's a theater right here. How many of you remember the theater? Awesome, oh my goodness. So this is what it used to look like, right? So the theater, the church, post office, there's a bus station there. Right?
Fountain.
So cool. Wouldn't it have been wonderful?
Fountain's still there, they moved it.
So I love this picture. I think it's from a graduation. It's from 1937. I love these 2 cats. Look at them. They're like, why are you taking our picture? Staring directly at the camera. I think it's a graduation. There's another photograph from the time where somebody's coming out in robes. So this is from the steps of the church, going down Speedwell that way. This is an aerial view. It's a little dim, but you can see the theater there, the church there. Pocahontas Lake is in the top. There's this weird little building here, which some of you probably also remember, was a municipal building, had a turret, right, like you do. And then this was a fire department. Right. Fire departments eventually moved down the street, further down Speedwell. Over the course of the 20th century, Speedwell is, for the most part, a really bustling commercial district. And there's shops all along. Here's the river again. It's a little bit smaller now. There's shops along here. This map's from 1910. The shops are like Undertaker, Taylor, fruits, sort of small marketplaces. There's a bowling alley, another theater. This photograph gives you an idea of what it looked like, right? Retail on the first floor, there's a butcher, tire shop, this is a tailor, apartments above it. This is not, there's a fair number, and is Ted France here? Excellent. So Ted France, if you haven't already joined his Facebook group, you absolutely have to. Thank you, Ted, for all the work you do. Amazing, amazing job. Thank you. One of the people on Ted France's group mentioned that Speedwell Avenue, and I'm going to swipe from your website, but I'm giving you credit, that there's a large number of businesses were owned by Jewish families. And a partial list of the proprietors included Meyer Friedman, Ruben Gervitz, Louis and Max Capel, Simon and Julia Steiner, Sam Schwartz, Harry Drell, Morris Rosenberg, Max Schlesinger, Cy Foreman, Phil Kantrowitz, Alex Newmark, William and Betty Wasser, Sam Berkowitz, and Samuel Weinstein. They sold, among other things, kosher meat, children's wear, vegetables, coats, jewelry, shoes, paint, cookies, pants, and live chickens. Anybody remember the chickens? All right. These chickens came up a lot when I would talk to people about Steeple Avenue. They go, there were chickens.
Sawdust on the floor.
Chickens. Somebody was selling chickens. Anyway, so there were chickens. These buildings stay in place until the 1960s. These are from Ray DeShara's files. These are the photographs they took of the buildings they tore down. So this is what they look like in the 60s. So pretty good shape. Again, what they look like from the back is not great. Right? So some of them not so well maintained on the other side. We'll see more of those pictures later. And the plan becomes to take everything from the theater to Spring Street, the entire area, buy everything and tear it all down. So that's the plan that's put forward to the federal government as an urban renewal plan. The folks who were the sort of creators of the project, the biggest champions, were number one, E. Marcos Nerone, who was mayor in 1965. Again, many of you probably remember him. Born and raised in Morristown, grew up in the Hollow, went to Morristown High School, passed away in 2002 at the age of 96, practiced law until the age of 89, was an absolute champion of the project.
What was his name?
Marcos
Nerone. And what inspired them, and a lot of the discourse at the time, was that the malls, like Short Hills Mall, were taking commercial traffic away from Morristown, and Route 10. We were going to lose money to Route 10. The other person who I've already mentioned a couple times is Ray DeShara, who, again, born and raised in Morristown, huge, loved Morristown perhaps more than anybody. And are some of his family members here? That's told his, there we go, awesome, thank you. Lisa gave me the heads up that you're coming, so thanks for showing up. So anyway, this picture is a picture of him. I think he's at the church. I don't know what that angle actually is, but he was the Urban Renewal Executive Director, and then eventually I think worked for Olin Fisher. He included in his papers in 1966 a letter from Ella Spector from the Housing and Urban Development from the federal government, and the quote is in there, "I know of no other director who has put more work, long hours, imagination, and downright stick-to-itiveness into any urban renewal project. I felt quite fortunate to be able to deal with a director like you, whose one consuming drive was to get the project completed in the best possible fashion as quickly as possible. Morristown is indeed fortunate to have you as its urban renewal director." This is 1966. And this was their plan. Now, it's a gritty photograph, I apologize for that, but it is not what's there now. Right? This is the first of three plans we're going to see today. Low-rise buildings, right? The very Jetsons-looking parking garage. It does take up the entire space. This is a driveway into the parking lot. It's not a road. Water Street no longer would connect to the Hollow if this was completed in this fashion. This is from 1964. Just note, it was originally supposed to be called the Kennedy Center. Both Cerrone and DeShara, as well as pretty much everyone who is in support of this project, is a member of the Democratic Party. This was intended to perhaps honor President Kennedy. But again, this is the first plan. And we go from there. Why did anyone feel that they could take over 11 acres of town, tear everything down, and build something new? Mainly, the town had done, this would have been the third urban renewal project. The first one was the Pocahontas Apartments right here. They're a housing project, they're in the Hollow. They were championed by the Urban League. These are records from the Urban League's files down in DC at the Library of Congress. This was celebrated as a collaborative effort There was a need for housing. People are pretty happy with the building. It's a relatively small project. This was a win for the town as well as the merchants, because the federal dollars came in and they went to local merchants to build the apartments. People had housing. Everything was pretty groovy. This inspired the town to take on the next big project, which was the Hollow Area Redevelopment Project, which is much bigger, and this is 1955 to 1960. This is the scope of it. There's going to be parking near Speedwell. There's going to be public housing for low-income people, the Black Box projects. There's going to be middle-income housing, the Beverly Apartments. There's towers looming over town like a malevolent iron giant. Anyway, sorry, opinion there, sorry. Anyway, so that's part of the project. There's another part, which is the Quarry Road project, which I'll talk about in a second. This is Evergreen Avenue looking south, right, towards town. This is now Martin Luther King Avenue. This is the bridge, looking for her, right? It's a fairly low-rise retail district with apartments above it. In order to do that 1955 project, the town, according to its own estimates, had to acquire and demolish 85 deteriorating substandard buildings containing 181 apartments, 10 business establishments, 2 industrial firms. They had to displace all of the people in those apartments. They had to keep record of what happened to those people. This document, which is here at the library, the first 50 families, is a record of the 50 families that were displaced by this project. And it's a phenomenal document. There isn't a similar one for the Speedwell Avenue Urban Renewal Project because I talked to a professor at Penn who said that the federal government got so much flack about people being displaced, they stopped requiring towns to keep record of who is displaced, which isn't great. So
you understand.
One of the things that happened in this part of the urban renewal history of Morristown is it happened at a time when the neighborhood was transitioning from an Italian neighborhood to a Black neighborhood, and you have, as successive waves of migration came through Morristown, from Irish to Italian to the Great Migration. You have a sort of natural progression where people start to move out, they sell their homes or they rent them out before the next group takes on all of the responsibilities of homeownership. When the town moved into this project, they cut checks to people owning property in the Hollow with the last names of Panucci, Terreri, Sterone, Vigilante, Nocero, Costanzo, Frasi, Casamasso, Tremalo, Correale, Corello, Lacanfora, and Petrozo. And when they went into the apartments to evict people and move them out, they moved people with the last names of Jackson, Robinson, Mobley, Walker, Stackhouse, and White. So this is a huge moment for like the town, for the history of like urban renewal, right? This to me is stunning because you have the town admitted they weren't going to be able to put everybody back. They were building fewer apartments than they were destroying, so some of those people don't come back. There's also people who are classified in the document as non-white property owners, right? So you have the beginning of property transitioning from one group to another, and then no property exists for purchase because it's all public housing. Except Morristown did something truly phenomenal, which is the Quarry Road project. And it was the only town in New Jersey that took advantage of this provision of the Federal Housing Act, and it's one of the only towns in the country that did. Basically, the town built Cape Cods, right? 48 of them, I believe. And if you qualified for an FHA loan, you could get one of those houses with no money down. And if you could live in it, sell it, it would be yours. It is a phenomenal opportunity to acquire that first rung on the property ladder. And the town determined that it should be deliberately diverse. So half the property owners were white, half the property owners were Black. This picture in the bottom corner, this is from Ray Manahan's materials when he was mayor. And I love this picture. We spent an hour talking about it. Right there's the mayor, part of the groundbreaking, and then there's this young man, 6 years old, Michael Jones. I'm like, why do I have these fancy shoes on? It's Saturday. What's happening? Okay, so a really phenomenal photograph. So not everyone was a fan of this project. A lot of people were. We'll get back to that a little bit later on. This is again from Mayor Manahan's, I think it's annual report, and it's the beginning and the end of a blighted area. There is, in this picture, a house is being demolished with a tank. So, might have been a bit of an overkill, but the armory had a tank and they needed something to do with it. So, there you go. Okay, 7 years later. We are now at 1965. It's, again, an opportunity to take on federal funds for urban renewal. There is a bit of a problem, however, in that the housing conditions in the Hollow are deplorable. And that includes the public housing, the privately owned housing, the privately managed housing in the Beverlies. And Chris Martin, I'm sure some of you know, and John Young decided to create a Morris County chapter of the Congress of Racial Equality. And this is Jane Edwards here and Julia Kersey there. And together, they documented how bad the housing was in Morristown. And they submitted a report to the aldermen, and they said, we want you to give us, tell us what you're gonna do to fix the housing. This is when they came back to ask for that report of what the town was gonna do about the housing. They had documented, I hope you'll steal your stomach for a second, that the odor of raw sewage permeated buildings because the sewers had been backed up into sinks and showers. In one apartment, a stream of water gushed, which came from flushed toilets. At that same building, an army of cockroaches were crawling through the shingles. Buildings had structural violations too numerous to even begin to list. They were infested with rodents and vermin, and according to them, 93% of the buildings in the Hollow were substandard. When they went to the aldermen and asked for a report of what was going to happen, this was at the town hall across the street, right in the ballroom at the Vale Mansion. One of the landlords of one of the still privately held homes, Camille Corte, was asked about the conditions in his units, and he said, you can take some people out of the ghetto, but you can't take the ghetto out of some people. Yeah. And he blamed the residents for the sewer problems, that they didn't know how to use their toilets. So, you can tell John Young's not happy. Jane Edwards in this picture, I'm imagining, is like, you gotta go do something about what's down there. David Noonan, who is a family member, one of my best friends, Colleen, said he would come up with a report. He would come up with a report, and he would respond within 2 weeks. 2 weeks later, let me back up a second, I got ahead of myself. In compiling this data about the housing in the Hollow, John Young and Chris Martin and Jane Edwards worked with a group called the Morris County Citizenship Project. And they were a group of 9 college kids who spent the summer of 1965 in Morristown. And they were Methodists, connected to the Methodist student movement. The Methodist student movement had a magazine called Motive. It was incredibly progressive. It was all about sort of leftist political change. It eventually gets shut down because it's too much for the Methodists. They were like, slow it down. And so they stopped publishing the magazine in 1972. They are connected to Tom Hayden's Students for Democratic Society, who was working in Newark that summer. And there's literally 9 kids that volunteered to come to Morristown, and the Methodists rent apartments for them in the Beverlies. They give them money for office supplies. And the Methodists sent kids to 2 towns that summer, 1965. One was Morristown, and the other was Watts in LA. I found one of the women has a really specific name, like very uncommon name, and I tracked her down and I sent her an email. And I was like, hey, did you spend the summer of 1965 in Morristown? And a couple days later, she sent me back an email like, yep. And she very graciously allowed me to interview her. And I said, what was that like coming into Morristown in 1965? She said I had no business being there, first of all. And there I was standing on the street corner in my Pomona College sweatshirt, my cutoff shorts, and my sandals, and trying to tell people how they should run their lives. She said I should never have been there. She teaches at East LA Community College, and I was like, where are your politics now? She's like, I'm a communist. I was like, all right. So she's a lot of fun. But one thing that is really remarkable is that those kids realized really early on that they were in way over their heads. And they started a chronicle of that summer. It's about 150 pages long. There's literally like day by day. This is August 17th. They typed it up. They submitted it to the Methodist Church. There's a copy at the archives in Drew. There's also a copy at Yale. It is phenomenal. It is just absolutely extraordinary document. And it gave me detail like day by day of what was happening that summer that wasn't really in the newspaper, or I had a different view. They also helped to fund the publication of the Hollow Area Report to the People, which Drew has some of the copies of, so if any of you have copies in your attics, I would love to see them. This is an endorsement of Connie Montgomery for the Board of Ed.
She just died,
She
right?
died last week.
Yeah, last week.
Remarkable human being. So this is part of, again, where I got some of the story from. So 2 weeks after that meeting at the with the alderman, asking them to do a report of what they were going to do about housing, another meeting was coming up, and everyone wanted to know what they were going to do. Everyone wanted this report, and the alderman canceled the meeting. So undeterred, Jane Edwards and Carol Ann Jones, one of the young kids, decided they would have a rally in the Hollow to sort of protest housing conditions. They sang "We Shall Overcome," right? They had, all kinds. They had about 125, 150 people there. It ended without incident, right? Everybody goes home, except there's a collection of kids, like 18, 19 years old, on the side of the rally, not really participating. They didn't speak. They didn't get up on the stage. They were drinking ages 18. They got a little bit inspired by the message of the day, and they said that they figured out that their biggest problem wasn't housing so much as the police officer who had a beat in the Hollow, who is Daniel Percalis. And they did not enjoy his presence in the Hollow, and they thought that their best move would be to attack him and steal his badge and steal his nightstick and embarrass him and get him kicked off the force, which they then proceeded to do. They found him on Upper Flagler. One young man knelt down behind him, another one pushed him over, they grabbed his nightstick, they roughed him up a little bit, at which point people who live there come out on their porches and start screaming, leave the cop alone, blah, blah, blah. Kids run away, Callis takes out his gun, shoots his gun. Now, he didn't hit anybody, nobody got shot. Could have been a warning shot, could have been intended to hurt somebody, I don't know. But that becomes the headline the next morning, right? That they beat cop after rights rally. So whatever concern there was about housing, whatever legitimate message there was, gets subsumed in this issue of the assault on the police officer. This is the newspaper article. There's this picture, felled by a gang. These are the three young men who were arrested. I think Sidney West was the one who knelt down. Vincent Caldwell may have been the person he would call, may have been the person who pushed him over. Thomas Pearson was acquitted. He was at home, he was part of it, but then he was home that night. The police came to pick him up. They roughed him up. His mother went to police headquarters to get him out. She wasn't allowed to see him. He's released the next day at 4 o'clock. He's bruised, he's bloody, his clothes are ripped. He was not found guilty, but the other two were. Now, this is overwhelming. Let me back up a second. For the town, people respond Police Chief Eugene Bauer says, "No one is going to get away with beating my police. We will meet force with force." The editors of the Daily Record said, "No matter what the grievance of the Negro in the Hollow, and no matter how right he must be, law and order must prevail. Riots and attacks on police officers cannot be condoned in any way." Mayor Sharon said, "We need to, this is a good community, and if people are going to come in and become rowdy, we will do whatever we think necessary to stop this rowdyism." People blamed the college kids. They blamed the interlopers. They said, it doesn't take much talent to come in from the outside and stir up Negro residents in the field of housing and job opportunities. Mayor Sharon said, "I was born and lived here a good part of my life, and I don't have to be told by some out-of-towners, somebody from Virginia or Kansas, to tell me the needs of the people in that section of Morristown." And then George Harris of the Urban League said, "I don't think the students should be here in the first place. They are only causing trouble." Not everyone criticized the college kids. John Young of CORE said, in the 3 years he'd been fighting to get something done about housing, he had never heard from the NAACP, the Urban League, the Fair Housing Council, or the Group on Active Leadership. The other groups don't represent the lower income groups. They may have been active in other parts of the county, but they have ignored this part of Morristown. And Julia Kersey said, "We are not slandering anyone. We are only protesting against the way we are informed. For too long we have been quiet, just like good little children who are told of coming treats if we are quiet and don't think. We must not lay down on the job. There's a lot of work to be done. We cannot let our steps falter in this struggle for social justice." So the conversation has now turned to this instead of housing. Town's on edge. There's a huge drought that summer too. So much of a drought that somebody in Randolph offered to give Morristown his pond, right? They just figure out a way to get the water downhill. Then in August, Watts explodes, right? So there's rioting, LA terror, 14 killed in LA, right? And if you notice, this is when the next plan for Speedwell Avenue is unveiled. This is plan number 2 of the 3 we're going to see today. In the midst of this chaos. Again, a different idea, a different design. There's going to be a 10-story apartment building, a 9-story office building, 7-story motel, 2 4-story department stores, parking spaces for 1,300 cars, a second Spring Street above the first one. So you don't need to go down into the hollow. There is nothing north facing, right? There's nothing for that part of the town to access, right? There's going to be a restaurant with an outdoor pavilion and a reflecting pool / ice skating pond. It's going to cost $4 million, and it's going to be done by Christmas of 1967. Anyway, Jane Edwards was not everybody was keen on this. Outside the Urban Renewal office, there are people protesting. Where are we going to go? Urban renewal means Negro removal, the quote from James Baldwin. The back here, not that you can see it, so back in the back says, "What about the Wickedy River project?" which was long promised, still has yet to be done. And then they did a door-to-door, what do you think? Right, man on the street kind of interviews. There's selfish reasons. I don't understand why they're doing this. This woman's like, they could just give us the money, which a great idea. So folks are not happy. Jane Edwards is there when it's unveiled. She goes back to the apartments in the Beverlys where the college kids are living. And according to them, she was so upset by the whole thing, she sat there and she couldn't speak. So, there's still no report from the town on what they're going to do about housing. Still no reports. There's going to be another meeting. This is now August 17th. This is Watts is rioted, everything's burning basically, and there's going to be another rally in the Hollow. George Harris of Urban League records a message at WMTR. They play it every hour on the hour. Don't go outside. Don't go to the rally. Things are going to get bad, right? The police come to the apartments of the Beverlys. They say you can't have the parking lot. You can't have the playground. You can't use amplification. You can't do this rally. They do it anyway. They're going to have the meeting anyway. Do something about housing. We need to hear what you're going to do about housing. The report still hasn't come out. It doesn't come out until the fall. And the town basically says that the leaders of the community in the hollow should teach their neighbors how to use their toilets. And that's the problem. And in the meantime, the students go back to college. The folks, some of the folks, including David Edwards, Jane Edwards' son, take up the mantle of the project, and they interview people about how they feel about urban renewal. This is again true. One 80-year-old woman was forced out of her home when the town needed land for the Beverleys. She said her house was very nice and didn't need tearing down. Another person said, I feel that we were just pushed out and forced to leave Morristown. We were replaced with buildings. And another one said, we need homes first, we can't live on a skating rink. Another person said, the only way we'll benefit from this program is when we spend money at the stores. And then somebody said, I don't feel the city's relocation program is satisfactory. I don't know where they could move us, but maybe anywhere would be better than this, and maybe we'll get away from the roaches. 2 years later. I'm skipping through a bunch of stuff. Number one, 2 different points from 1968 is that an offshoot of the Black Panthers came to Morristown in 1968, arguing that they wanted to do something about improving the conditions for people living in Morristown, and they cited the lack of housing and the urban renewal project as reasons why they were inspired to come here. This is an article, letter to the editor, in 1969 during the time of the merger where Morris Township wanted to leave the public school system. Part of what they argue is Morristown is a mess because of the urban renewal projects and the lack of housing. But nonetheless, we get to 1968, 1969, 1970, and the buildings start coming down. So there's more photographs from behind Speedwell Avenue. Not every building was falling apart. Some of them were pretty bad shape. This would have been where the pond was, foreground. Brick hardware. Looks pretty intact. Right? I know I might be going through a little fast, so let me know if I'm going too fast. These are all part of the records of the urban renewal project that are here at the library. This is going down Water Street. So this is a house being demolished. This is a bulldozer taking out an apartment building on Water Street. The church is up in the back. Really phenomenal photographs. This is what Speedwell looked like before they started tearing everything down. You can see the Methodist church spire over there. There's that municipal building with the turret. This, I believe, might be part of the firehouse. There was a fire in 1968 after they decided to move the firehouse as well.
Across the street, the fire?
Yeah. And then the turret back there, back. One building they decided not to tear down, but actually move, was the Moses Esty House, which is the bottom of Spring Street. And it was, Moses Esty fought in the Revolutionary War.
Yes.
This fun fact, his grandmother was killed as a witch in Salem. So, anyway, his home was actually...
My roommate from college.
His home was actually moved to Speedwell Village. So at the cost of about $94,000, it was moved down Speedwell, back the branches to make room for it. You can go see it today, but I tried to check it out and you can't get in. There's no steps or doorknob. So it makes it tougher.
Only witches can go.
Only witches.
Like, why did I
So, okay, so that was 1969. There's a groundbreaking ceremony in 1971. As you can tell, 1776 is already built. I'm skipping ahead, obviously. At this point, one fun fact about the groundbreaking ceremony is that they didn't actually break any ground. They just set off some fireworks instead. Nobody knew fireworks were happening, so the police had all kinds of calls, like what's happening. Anyway, they don't know what they're gonna build. They don't know how much it's gonna cost, and there's no money anyway. And this is the plan. Plan number 3. There's gonna be a mall. Again, this is a driveway into the parking lot. There's no access to the north part of town. And that's part 1. So. And I told you the shenanigans come in part 2. So this is the sober, kind of somber part of it all. It goes crazy from there. Yes?
I noticed that you had said that these were aldermen, and I think the government changed in '72. Did that form of government have anything to do with the redevelopment in terms of who they represented? Because now we have 4 boards. Were they representing all boards and all people?
This is a great question. And if you couldn't hear it, it's about the
Form of government.
form of government. The town had aldermen. It changes to a town council, so they're councilmen eventually. One glitch in that was that Emilio Gervasio only served as mayor for 1 year, and he was dead set against the project, so we'll talk about him in part 2. The wards also change, and Chris Martin gave me some great insight into that. There were 4 wards, and then there were 5 wards, and then there's 4 wards again. By the time we pick up the story, again, Chris Martin will be on the town council or be an alderman. And so will James Lassiter. And so there's a more diverse board. David Edwards, who was part of the protest, becomes town council president in 1974. I think there is an active move to get representation for the 2nd ward. That takes some steps to get it done, but eventually it does become sort of pretty cohesive power block in the 2nd ward. I find it fascinating that Morristown is really into the wards, like you live in other towns and there's not quite as much of a designation. People go, oh, that's the 1st ward, So there's a way in which it's very little big city government, but it's such a small town. It's really fascinating. But the 2nd ward is essentially the north part of town. 3rd ward is the west, right? And then at different times, the 4th ward, there's the by Washington's headquarters, and then the historic district. So anyway, so I don't know if the alderman-mayor construction influenced it too much. People are pretty into the whole project. It's a ton of money. It's a ton of money, and it's going to come into local merchants and craftspeople, so people aren't necessarily opposed to it. The property owners aren't objecting to it either. It's just the residents.
Yeah.
It's the people who lived in the buildings. Yes, sir.
How did the 1776 and the realignment of Water Street fit into this set of plans?
How did the realignment get into the plans? It's a great question. They definitely decide to put Water Street back in, right? I don't exactly know what meeting that happened at where they decided to put the plans back in. As you can tell, that first building is built. The contract was basically that Lester Dwarman was going to build that building, and then the town was going to pick up the next part of the project. That doesn't happen the way they intended to. And there's a lawsuit. That's part 2. Yeah, sorry. Let's go back. Any other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, it's could come out of left field, but
the whole thing is out of left field.
During demolition, the Underground Railroad came and stopped demolition for a while. Is that how it is?
The Underground Railroad, in terms of
Moving slaves around?
did that come as part of this? That's one thing I haven't encountered in this story.
There's nobody else.
There's a lot of parts that fit into it, like prohibition, speakeasies, transition of Benedict Arnold's first trial was in the neighborhood, but that I haven't encountered. But I'll keep looking. I have those. Yes.
Were the retail businesses on Speedwell Avenue beginning to suffer during this period, or
I don't
are they
think so.
okay financially, or? I mean, was there a driver there? I mean, they see the malls coming.
Yeah.
They don't. This is long before the sort of urban renewal of the 90s and thousands of people wanting to live there.
Yeah.
So what were the retailers thinking at the time? Do you know?
It's a great question. John Dalton, who owned a shop on Speedwell, originally in like 1960s, 64, 63, 64, wanted there to be a parking garage on High Street. There's now Catano Avenue. And they wanted parking to help support the businesses. And that's maybe where the idea came in, that there needed to be a parking garage in the area. Then there was going to be a post office at the corner of Spring and Speedwell, and there was going to be parking there. And then that morphed, and then there's this sort of story about Marcus Cerrone like banging on the desk of the postmaster. It's like, no, it has to be bigger. So by the time it gets rolling, they're not necessarily opposed to it. By 1968, 1969, there's a lot of coverage in the newspaper about how frustrated they are that it's not happening fast enough. So they don't know if they should hire more people. They don't know if they should bring in inventory. They don't know if they should train people. If they can't find, if they're going to be dislocated, relocated, they can't find other locations for their businesses. And so there's a lot of frustration. For most of the time, it's like they intend to build a mall, right? Even when they have the groundbreaking, they're talking about the Colonial Mall, right? That there's going to be this shopping center so that they imagine they'll be part of it, right? They don't know that it'll be something totally different by the time it's done 20 years later. So the short answer to the question is they didn't so much mind. It was kind of in their heads, parking would be great, but it gets away from everybody. Any other questions? Yeah, Ted.
Yeah, I'm just trying to follow the funding aspect of it. And
Oh, yeah.
now you said initially the percent was mostly, it was federal are going to pay for all of this?
So Marcus Cerrone at first says it's going to cost $4 million and like $3 million of it is going to be reimbursed by the federal government, and it's going to bring in $10 to $20 million a year in rateables. That doesn't happen. This is actually telegram. It's most of this in the early days by telegram. From 1966, and it's two rate share, and it says that the federal government temporary loan funds, roughly $5.6 million, is coming to Morristown. It eventually becomes, the federal government gives $9 million. Where the extra money is going to come from is a big mystery. How much it's going to cost is a mystery because they don't know what they're going to build, because that's a mystery. The whole idea is that it will revitalize the commercial district, it will bring in rateables, it won't cost very much, and the federal government's going to pay for whatever it's going to cost anyway.
So the federal government actually gave, it wasn't a loan, they gave the grant, they gave $9 million to the town.
So when, jumping ahead, when the whole thing falls apart later on, part of the reason for keeping going with it is the federal government's already invested $9 million. And if we don't build what we say we're going to build, then we have to give the money back. Which the federal government was like, no, you don't have to give us the money back. So, but that's much later. And so there's
Late 70s.
a lot of challenges. Morristown eventually does have to borrow close to $25 million, but that's...
They were only slightly over budget. Just a little bit.
Who paid for when they removed all the people out of their own homes, they had their own homes, who paid for that?
That's part of the
Federal,
renewal.
$9 million, that was part of it.
Yeah, part of the acquisition of the properties and the relocation. There was a budget allotted for each family to get money to relocate. Some of that money wasn't allocated, wasn't actually given to people, but it was supposed to be there for them. Yeah.
Was there any concern for environmental protection when they did all the destruction? And what about flooding themselves, this river that floods all the time?
This is great teases for the next part. I'm afraid to give away the whole story. Part of the construction, the culverts bringing the water from that mill pond into Liberty River Basin gets destroyed. There's lots of problems with sewer hookups. Were they paying attention to tearing down buildings and throwing them? into the dumpsters, no, there wasn't a lot of like, let's salvage part of this.
There was no EPA at that point?
On the 60s.
Not till the 70s?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's
No Civil Rights Act?
Civil Rights Act is 65, 64, 65, so it's there's some concern, obviously, for, you know, displacing communities, but then it just stopped collecting data.
Was because of the civil rights.
Any other questions, guys?
Yeah.
Yeah. Question, Morristown had, on the periphery of it, still does, a number of colonial families, one of which was the Frelinghuysen family, another was the Schuyler family, which was involved in the whole Hamilton thing and everything. Did they have any role in this at all, or any say-so? Even though I know they didn't live right in Morristown, but the Frelinghuysens lived right on the edge, and Schuylers lived in Morristown. What role, if
Where were
any,
they?
did the colonial families have?
Sure. So, interestingly, at the groundbreaking ceremony, Harrison Williams was there, the senator who's later
Yes.
did an abscam. So this is where, you know, the meme at the beginning of like, it's all connected. Like if I told you this presentation is gonna have abscam, communists, you know, speakeasies, live chickens, like you'd been like, this one at that one. But anyway, that's the story. So Harrison Williams is there. The Frelinghuyens are not necessarily there. There is a moment in town history where H.B. Frelinghuysen, or I think it was Peter's father,
The airport.
was congressman, and he was doing something about the FHA, and there was a protest, and people were like, you need to back off the FHA because it helps us with our loans. And so I think they were a little bit more on the conservative, don't have federal funding for these programs kind of side of it. But people were generally in favor of what was happening. And so, plus I believe he's a Republican, right? It's a Democratic town. And so there's not a lot of coordination from like the county. People go to the county and ask for relief for some of these issues in terms of housing. There's eventually grand jury investigations. The courts come in pretty strong on behalf of tenants when the housing is really bad. But I haven't run across the Schuyler's either. And so there's a lot of, and I think Ted could speak to this as well, there's a lot of people who cite the sort of Headquarters Plaza project as like the beginning of the end, right? Like this is the beginning of the end of colonial Morristown. I don't know if that argument is entirely intact or serves completely the whole story, but it is a hugely divisive issue, and obviously it sparks a lot of concern and curiosity. That there was like 70 or 80 comments on the post you made, Ted, so like people are, it's a huge
I've
issue.
never done any kind of a survey of people. It's more of a reaction. It's helpful that you're putting together something like this because it kind of pieces together some of the history, which is, when you know history, no matter how prejudiced you are, how political you are, history is right there and it says it. And that's what I try to do, is educate people so they don't, oh, this right wing, left wing, let's look at the floods, let's look at the economics, let's look at the human side, the housing, so eventually, you get more feedback, but the kind of, at that time, my father was a fireman, he worked there, I knew a lot of shop owners, like someone said, they were fairly, it was a vibrant area, but there was a push. And there's also engineering issues, like you said, with that, they never should have built on the area anyway initially, because it was not founded, we found out, through engineering, stuff like that, but it was similar to what South Street is now. It was a very active part of the town. It was, there wasn't parking, but it was still, merchants did very well with it.
And there's really, thank you, and there's also such an important part of this is my shout out to James. Again, thank you so much, your team is amazing. Growing up here, going through the school district, teaching Morristown High, I didn't know, most of the story. And then having the opportunity to read that daily chronicle of those kids, this is what happened on August 12th, this is what happened on August 13th. The fact that the libraries have kept these documents and allowed researchers to dig through them and to know what actually happened is invaluable. So it makes me, it's my happy place. I come down here, I'm like, woo! I'm back where I belong. Anyway, Kyle, what's your question?
Okay, so having grown up here,
Yeah.
and now both of us living outside of town, and looking in what's happening to our small little hometown,
Yeah.
what is history telling us about what has happened then and what is still happening today?
Well, that's one of the things that's really, we've talked about is really fascinating, is that when I see the articles about people asking for the town to do something about the conditions in the public housing because there's raw sewage in their apartments, my heart sinks. It's like, it's been 60 years. It's to the day sometimes, it's just absolutely stunning. And again, it's just an exhortation to listen to everybody in the community to have a consensus. But that, Oscar Wilde's line about socialism is it takes too many evenings, right? And so there's often not enough time in people's days to participate in every decision-making process. Did you have a question?
I did.
Yeah.
Do you think that a similar project would happen nowadays with lighted projects on and around the green?
Well, it's happened.
So would something happen today, like a similar project? Well, it's really fascinating, right? Because a lot of the urban renewal projects, especially like massive housing projects, enormous towers of housing for low-income people, have been demolished and sort of decentralized, right? And a lot of places there's more reliance on Section 8 housing, and so it's more in the hands of private property owners. So I don't know if there would be a similar government-run housing project like that. I think there's a little bit more reliance on the public market. I don't know if that's entirely successful, but I don't see,
It's happened.
I don't see it happening. Like,
I mean,
what do you say?
not federally funded,
Right.
but privately funded.
Right.
It's going on all over town. I
Yeah.
mean, you see it on
And Station Day.
M Station, Lakeland Bank Building.
Yeah, it's
You know,
more
but
private
it's what's all
funding.
private.
Yeah, and there's a lot, and it's really fascinating too because there's, as we'll get into in part 2, I'm not taking attendance, but I hope you all come back. There's a lot of funds that are lost in the process, and I've spoken with people in the in researching this, and they go, yeah, people stole money, but at least something got built. I'm like, I don't know. So it's come down on either side of that issue. Any other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, you had mentioned at the beginning that somebody was trying to keep track of who the people who were driven out and how many that came back, but it didn't stop. So is there any way, it sounds like this neighborhood was destroyed and nobody ever came back. That's kind of how it sounds.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, and part of, and the larger issue, which I sort of touched on, but didn't, is part and parcel of this whole project, is the fact that Morristown did not have at the time what they refer to as open housing. And so there's racial discrimination in housing. And so there is a concentration of people, there's a demand for housing because it's sort of racially defined, right? People aren't selling their homes to Black families. They're not, there's not mortgages available for people in certain neighborhoods. That there's a crush. And it was, were any of you members of the Fair Housing Council?
My mother was.
Okay, right, so the Fair Housing Council was where you wanted to be back in the day because it was a huge group of people. They had dinner dances at the Governor Morris. Count Basie came, King Curtis came, like the New York Times profiled it. There were 700 people dancing at Count Basie in March of 1965, right? So there's a whole vibe going on about like open housing. The Fair Housing Council sent a letter to 350 realtors in town saying, would you promise that you will encourage people to sell their homes to Black families? And the Realtor Association got offended by that, and only 10 realtors signed the pledge and returned it. And the Fair Housing Council distributed that list of those 10 people, but the others got offended saying that they were being maligned. So there's a huge amount of energy about open housing. There's white families, Black families would go try to rent a place. They would be told the place was full. White family would go afterwards and they'd be told, oh, it's available for you. It did stings. It was a huge amount of energy around trying to move the housing to sort of desegregate housing. At one point in 1968, this is where I'm going off the rails. I apologize. I held it in for so long. But at one point in 1968, part of when I said 2 years later, part of what was holding things up was the federal government balked at giving the town money for rebuilding Upper Flagler because they said that Morristown was putting all of the low-income housing in one neighborhood and they were creating a ghetto. So the town was like, we'll build it on Mount Kemble across from Collis Avenue, and they went to and everyone was like, and then the planning board denied the variance, and the federal government was like, oh, well, you tried, and they gave them the money and they built everything on Upper Flagler. And so there's a lot of, so much to the dynamics of trying to create better housing in town, decentralizing it from the one neighborhood, and then in the middle of it, just bulldozing everything and building a parking lot, 44 years of concrete. Yeah.
So in the same vein, you mentioned those Cape Cod houses.
Yeah.
That was a project that happened.
Yeah.
Where
Super cool.
And so does that still exist, or did that get knocked down, and was that
No, it's
successful?
there.
They still exist. Yeah, they become privately owned homes, right? So people pay off their mortgages and either sell them or, stay there and rebuild them. They're really lovely.
So where is it?
It's on Corey
On the other
Road.
side of the street.
So if you go out Speedwell, you can turn right by Speedwell Village, you can turn in that way. Or you go down MLK, and I believe Corey Road connects to there. But it's like a swoop, it's like a curvy road.
Is it still diverse?
It was not, after they sold the homes, I don't think there was any more, engineering of who lived there, right? And in fact, at that meeting in July of 1965, there were complaints that the black families in Corey Road had brought in too many relatives, and they had driven out the whites, and they had ghettoized the neighborhood, which was part of the discourse that night, which is horrific. But that basically speaks to the fact that once you had a home, you could sell it to whoever you want, and so it was not the ownership wasn't regulated at that point. So it was a really lovely neighborhood, and the houses are spread out. It's beautiful.
At what point does it change from the original name to Kennedy's to Headquarters Plaza, and did that have any influence on getting it through as they changed the name?
Yeah, so it's the Kennedy Center for a brief amount of time, and then it is the Colonial Mall, right? They're going to build the mall, and then eventually the town backs out of the whole thing and turns it over to Olnick and Fisher, and they name it Headquarters Plaza. So before Headquarters Plaza, like I said, shenanigans. After it's named that, it becomes just a construction project.
And when did the hotel come in?
I think it was kind of always the plan to have some part of a hotel there, but that comes in later. I think the 5th tower is built 1987. Once the shenanigans stopped, I that was interesting.
No, but Headquarters, I think Headquarters did open in 85 or 86.
I think it's part of it is open in 84, and then it's open. The last tower is built in 87. I could be wrong. Yeah, sir.
Is there any commercial interest involved in deciding these things that were the way it was going to be? Like, was Bamberger's there, or a bank or something like that?
Sure. So the Chamber of Commerce at the time was a big fan, and they gave talks at the Women's Club. They were the company that owned Bamberger's. Bamberger's was there. They said, hallelujah, this is fantastic. You would think they might be objecting to the fact that there's going to be a mall across the street, but they were in favor. I haven't found a single person who put their name on enjoying the fact that the Park Theater got torn down. But that to me is just a travesty. But people were pretty excited about the whole thing. It was very much the wave of the future, better than nothing. There wasn't a lot of open opposition to it from the merchants. All right. I will happily answer any other questions you have, but I'll see you in part 2. Thank you for coming out.